Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and sorry I couldn't have been here any earlier because it's coming up to International Women's Day. I was at a number of events throughout the day, and in fact, I'm going on to another one after this. So you see a little bit about me. I know some of you, not all of you, but what I'm trying to do is try and thread some of the themes that have come through today. I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle, not from the construction industry, but from another industry that is quite male dominated. So if you take a look at what I'm wearing, I'm going to start by the spider brooch. Now, the spider brooch, I don't know if anybody of you can think of who would have been wearing a spider brooch recently, because she would actually be my hero. And that is Lady Brenda Hale. And you will know that Lady Brenda Hale made that astounding ruling on the legality of closing down Parliament. And she is a woman who was the first president of the Supreme Court. And her motto is, women are equal to everything. So if we start with that premise that women are equal to everything, she is my hero, and it's important for me to celebrate her. Secondly, what I have on, because we're coming up towards International Women's Day, is a purple ribbon. And a purple ribbon for me coming in towards International Women's Day is all about pride in ourselves as women, our steadfastness, our self-respect, and our loyalty. And that's what we're about as females. And finally, within that, I have the brand of the organisation I am very proud to lead, which is the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service. So you will see from the programme that I have chosen a Franz Kafka quotation, "Paths are made for walking." I was really interested in the last speaker and how she talked about her journey through, and absolutely right in what she was saying about women don't put themselves forward as well, perhaps, as men put themselves forward. But for me in my career, it most definitely didn't go in a straight line. So rather than sort of CV me, I'm going to talk about my career and how it dipped in and out and how I got to where I am today and the journey I actually have ahead of me. So for me, my journey has had many highs and many lows, many knocks and many successes. There is no elevator to success. You got to take the stairs. And in taking the stairs, you're going to fall down all the time. But the key piece is, for women, particularly in your industry and where I am now, you got to get up and you got to go on and you got to take the next step. So it's all about resilience, and it's all about moving forward, taking the knocks, learning from them, not seeing yourself as a failure and the tattoo failure across it. Forget about that. Learn from it and move on. And I've tried to do that in my career. At 18, I decided that I wasn't going to university. I wasn't doing any of that. I was actually going to join British Airways as an air hostess. I headed off to London, did the course, and was good to go. And for me, at 18, it was all about the uniform. And I will return to that in a minute. And it was all about going across the world and meeting all these different people. My beloved mother, herself a woman in a man's world, having studied science at university as the only female in her class. And worthy of note, when we speak of non-traditional roles, and that was in the late 40s. So you can imagine what it was like for her as a woman for the country, from the country, coming up to Belfast, and the only female in a man's type of role studying science. So perhaps that's where I got it all from, that resilience. But joining British Airways wasn't going to happen because my mother knew best. And what she did do was apply an intellectual prowess to a vulnerable 18-year-old who just wanted to wear a uniform and say, well, look, you can always return to it next year. And that's basically what happened. I never thought about it again. And at that point, I decided that the path I was going to walk was a path into university, and then after that, to be a teacher. So I studied English and French at university, and then in my PGCE year, I taught in a very well-known boys' grammar school in Belfast, and also in a boys' post-primary school in inner-city Belfast, with hard-to-teach, hard-to-reach young men, 16, 17, who just didn't want to be there, totally challenging behaviour. And you know what? I loved every minute of it. And why did I love every minute of it? Because I knew that my input was actually going to make a difference to their lives. After that, I then went on to teach in a boys' school and become a principal in a boys' school. And you can see the thread coming through here that throughout my career, I have generally worked in a male environment. Certainly within the school context, as the only female teaching in the upper end of the school, I suffered those gender stereotypes, which was very much around women only teach in the infants. Well, actually, get real, no they don't. I teach up the school. So I was the only woman teaching the 11 plus where the gender, and I heard a lady talking there earlier, one of the students over there, you know, the gender stereotypes were there. And it is when you judge that it is, well, you're not very keen on it, to it is totally unacceptable. And that was in the early 90s. And that was then. And in some regards, it hasn't changed that much. I then went on to take a secondment to the Belfast Education and Library Board. And career-wise, that was my biggest break. And that's where it all started to happen for me. I actually thought I was running the Belfast Education and Library Board because I was so thrilled to actually get the job. And on the first day, I drove into the car park and I saw a spot to park. I thought, that's for me. So when I went in my Ford Escort, and all of a sudden I was surrounded by these, and I mean that, men in suits saying, you can't park there. And I said, well, I'm Carmel McKinney and I'm starting this job today and I'm very excited. You can't park there. That is the car parking spot for the chair of the board. And I said, who's the chair of the board? What is the board? And you had spoken about the boardroom apprentice earlier. What do they do and who cares? But either way, I had to pull out of the car park. However, it sparked in me a, hold on a minute here. What do boards actually do? What value do they add? So the type of me, which would be a very inquisitive nature, was I went off and researched all about boards. Because in general, I think for most of us, we're not really sure what boards actually do, what non-executives do, what directors do. So I went off and researched, and guess what? A public appointment came up in the Belfast Education and Library Board, which I successfully got. And ironically, 5 years later, I reversed my car into the same car park as the chairperson of the Belfast Education and Library Board, a female in a man's world. So off we went, and I tell you this, I had to work very hard at it. 14 of my colleagues were leading politicians, mostly male board, but you know what? It was a great learning experience. However, it was also very challenging to be a female in a man's world, and resilience became my middle name. So at home at night, I used to say, oh, I'm not so sure if I'm... We automatically, as women, doubt ourselves. We automatically say, maybe I could have done that better. That's our DNA. We're made up like that. So we do get stronger and we do get more resilient when we're out there and you're forced with that every day and you do want to make an impression and you do want to be good at what you do. I then went on to chair a further education college because I have a great passion for young people. And let's face it, in many of our further education colleges, those young people are there because perhaps schools didn't work for them. So they are comeback kids and they're getting another chance. So that is why a role as a teacher, lecturer, or a governor on a further education college is so important. And at this point, I am going to give a huge shout out to Lynn Carville and Women's Tech and the amazing work that they are doing with Gilbert Ash. I've had the pleasure of going out to talk to Lynn and learn about the work they do. I mean, that is such an amazing project. And you know what, Lynn? There's huge potential elsewhere for that. But wonderful the work that Lynn is doing. So, in my own journey in 2015, because you kind of know it's time for a change because there's no remote, you had to get up and change yourself. I saw an advertisement for the chairperson of the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service. Now, when any of us say Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service, we think uniforms, handsome, all of that goes with it. Push past that a little bit. I said, talk to my mother, who was my role model, and she said, you could do that. Of course you could. Off I sailed for the interview because I had no expectation of getting it because it's a public appointment, so you have to go through a process and have to be a ministerial decision. Guess what? I got it. However, I am the only female in the boardroom. So the entire board is male and I am the female chair. And I do remember my first day going in, standing there in my little suit, ready to go. And I thought, this is going to be seriously different. However, in being seriously different, there were opportunities in there for me as a female to actually look at the underrepresentation of females within the service. Not only at board level, but in general within the service. And I was talking to a gentleman at the back there. I don't know if you read the paper today. Only 7% of the fire and rescue service across the UK is females. Only 7%. So there's an enormous amount of work to be done there. Now again, it's like everything else. If any of my children had come to me to say they were going to be a firefighter, I'd have said, no, you're not. You know, schools would not, and I agree with the earlier speaker, we have a tendency as teachers to not push our young people in certain directions, but the expectation would be that we would go in certain directions. And that's why further education, post-primaries, and I'm going to dip it even lower, on primary schools have such a critical role to play to break down from the very early stages in the infants. You know, you don't necessarily put the females in to play with the dolls or whatever it is. You know, it's opening up that field to youngsters that by the time they are 11, well, non-traditional roles mean nothing to them. They are capable and should move on. So schools have absolutely more work to do in that regard. Further education colleges have a lot of work to do, and certainly within the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service we have been doing a lot of outreach work, come and try days with young women to encourage them to join the service. So in terms of the boardroom. And back to this gentleman who spoke earlier, we had 2 boardroom apprentices, and there are a number of very, very good mentoring programs out there, including Queen's. We have a postgraduate from Queen's this year. So the early days in the boardroom were really a sea of uniforms. I remember, this is a uniform organisation. It's all about rank. It's all about the uniform. And let's face it, they are very brave and they are fantastic, because when you're running out, they're running in. So it was all these uniforms and all these males. And I sort of thought to myself, well, for a start, there should be more women on the board. And secondly, let's look at that middle tier of managers who are females, and what can I do to actually grow that pipeline of females through the organisation, really as an ambassador to actually get them, back to your point, to think, well, I can go for that promotion. I'm able to go for that promotion. And what can I do in my role to encourage them to do that? And we have done an awful lot of work in that regard. We are doing a lot of work with the Commissioner for Public Appointments around the whole area of increasing the representation of females in the boardroom. And what I do have to say is, it isn't as though that females aren't getting posts. It's about females having the confidence to apply for the posts. So it isn't as though there's any type of discrimination of females in the boardroom. It's that they're not applying. So we're working with the Commissioner for Public Appointments at the minute, and we have a leadership hub within the fire service, and the Commissioner and her team are coming in to work with our middle managers, who are all females, to actually look at, here's what a public appointment looks like. This is what you have to do to get it, and you'll never get the first one. You do have to manage your expectations and have a journey of development before you end up in a post, for example, that I'm in. We've done a lot of work in that. However, because it's a male organisation, the role and function of males, we've got to have males in there, because at the end of the day, what we want are leaders. Not female leaders, male leaders. And here she is, she's a female leader, and here he is, he's a male leader. We need leaders. So I set about then approaching the most senior officers within the organisation to say, will you be ambassadors for the work we are doing to encourage women? And you know what? They were absolutely brilliant. They wanted to do it. They contributed to it. They were very proactive in it. And their involvement in it actually added even more value to what I was trying to do. Now, there were obstacles along the way, because, you know, you start off with this huge momentum and then other things take over. And in my role as the chair of a public sector organisation with over 2,000 people working in it, corporate governance is what my role is about. So the boardroom is all about corporate governance. It's all about responsibility. It's all about accountability, because if it goes off the rails, it's me up with the minister giving an account. So we've got to understand that whilst it's great to say it, when it goes wrong, so if it goes wrong, it's me up with the minister. So it's getting the balance of all of that. Yes, we want females on board. Yes, we want this underrepresentation dealt with. But we got to understand the role and function of a board is to make sure the organisation is running effectively. But for me, it's been all about resilience, because quite frankly, there have been days where I have said, oh, you know what? This is really, really difficult. It is not easy walking into a boardroom with a boardroom full of males, and there you are, the only female. However, if you were to say to me, what has helped me on my way? Well, my beloved mother, she helped me on my way. She was a woman in the late 40s who saw a lot of gender bias, but she still pushed on. And she inculcated in both of her daughters the same: you can do anything you want to do, just work hard, push forward, and don't be afraid to put up your hand. However, what she also said was, don't get too big for your boots, because people don't like people like that. And none of us like people like that, let's face it. So it's keeping that professional humility, but at the same time driving the organisation forward as well. So I do encourage all of you here to look at the notion, and Barry did comment on it earlier with the Boardroom Apprentice scheme, and there are others. And mentoring, I also concur with the speaker who spoke earlier. Mentoring, which is, it's not hugging one another and telling one another you're great. It's about that critical friendship developing where you can learn from one another. But also too, within the construction industry, I think it is important to mentor outside the construction industry as well. To obviously internally you learn from one another because you're all experts in that field. But other females in other industries can also help you and widen your understanding outside the construction industry. And I think that's very important as well. So the two speakers who mentioned that, couldn't agree more. For me, the work within the fire and rescue service has been tremendously rewarding. You know, a couple of years ago, I was in New York. Actually, it was let's face it, it was the high point. I was in New York for the St. Patrick's Day parade, and was at the front of the parade with the fire department of New York. I want you to think about that. Turning out onto Fifth Avenue, and the sea of faces and that tremendous pride that the American people have in their fire department. 9/11, you know. It was just awesome. And it's those magic moments where you say, wow, I have a great job. I'm surrounded by brilliant people. Yes, they can be challenging because men have egos, so have women. But men, you have to climb their egos, and it's getting that balance right. But would I change it? Absolutely not. They're fabulous to work with. However, going forward, it came to a point where I said, okay, this is great. Everything's going great with all these schemes going on. I personally have been very lucky on behalf of the organisation to win a number of awards for the work that we are doing. Really, really proud of that. But I thought, you know what? I can add value a little bit more because I am passionate about equality, diversity and inclusion. You can talk about it. People talk about it a lot, but I believe you got to see it in action. So I thought, where can I actually take my skill set next, which will then add value that I can bring into my current role? And last week, the Secretary of State appointed me as an Equality Commissioner for Northern Ireland. And I have to say, I was really proud of that one because thank you. That gives me another string to my bow in my daily work. Apart from that, away from work, I play golf very badly. I have a family who love me, a golden retriever who I adore. I lost my mother a couple of years ago. It was the greatest devastation in my entire life. It took me at least a year even to recognize that she wasn't there anymore. But what I do know is she has left a tremendous legacy in both of her daughters. I encourage each of you to keep doing what you're doing. You're in a tremendous industry that I don't know all that much about, but you are women in non-traditional roles, and I am a woman in a non-traditional role. I wish you well. I hope a couple of takeaways comes out of this today, and thank you all for listening to my story.